In this video, we continue with our series on the basics of 5th edition D&D, which Baldur's Gate 3 will be based off of, as confirmed by Sven Vinke of Larian Studios. We'll be taking a look at feats, weapons, and armor, and how they apply to things mentioned in our previous videos, as well as the differences between them now compared with earlier editions of Dungeons & Dragons. In our previous video, we took a look at proficiency, skills, advantage, and disadvantage, and how they play a huge part in the mechanics of 5th edition. They are fundamentals that all Baldur's Gate 3 players could benefit from knowing, so if you're not familiar with them and haven't watched that video yet, I suggest you begin there before watching this one. Otherwise, we'll begin with feats and how it affects the game in 5th edition. You can also visit our D&D guide section if you need more help. Feats are technically an optional mechanic found in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and not all campaigns use them, and is really a player dungeon master preference. However, they have been confirmed to be in Baldur's Gate 3, so I've included them here. Feats, for all intents and purposes, work like talents or perks in other role-playing games, and they give the character a very specific bonus. In 5th edition, they are obtained a bit differently than in 3.5 or Pathfinder. In 3.5 D&D Neverwinter Nights, players can select one feat during character creation, and then they gain one feat every third level, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, and 18. There are certain additional feats some classes like Fighter and races like Human get, but that's the basics of 3.5 feats. In Pathfinder 1st Edition, Pathfinder Kingmaker, players can select one feat during character creation, and then again at every odd level, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 15, 17, and 19. And just like 3.5 D&D, certain classes like Fighter and races like Human will gain additional feats, but again, that's the basics of it. In D&D 5th Edition, Baldur's Gate 3, players don't gain feats automatically at certain levels, and as I mentioned above, it's actually an optional mechanic. However, when playing 5th Edition D&D with this mechanic, players can opt out of their ability score improvement in exchange for a feat. Players gain an ability point to spend usually every 4th level, 4, 8, 12, 16, and 19, for a total of 5 ability score improvements. This means on most characters you'll have a maximum of 5 feats if you forgo any ability score improvement. But just like 3.5 D&D and Pathfinder, humans and fighters gain additional feats. This might seem like a simplified system, and indeed it is, but keep in mind that there are several feats in 5th edition that grant you an ability point in a specific ability, as well as other bonuses. For example, if you choose the Weapon Master feat, you will gain 1 point to spend in either Strength or Dexterity, in addition to proficiency with 4 weapons of your choosing. Or for example, the Actor feat, which grants you 1 increase to your Charisma score, in addition to advantage on Charisma Deception and Charisma Performance checks, as well as the capability to mimic the speech of other characters. This makes these type of feats extremely important, and players should consider grabbing feats that give them both an ability score improvement as well as other passive benefits. An important thing to remember is that not all feats in 5th edition can be used by everyone, just like 3.5 in Pathfinder, and many have requirements that must be met in order to obtain them. Some require an ability score of at least 13 in a specific ability like Inspiring Leader or Defensive Duelist, and others have specific requirements like Elemental Adept and Heavily Armored. Keep these things in mind and plan ahead. If you're having trouble with this aspect, don't worry, we'll have class and build guides coming that will help you out with your specific setup where these things are discussed in more detail, so stay tuned for those. Weapons are a huge part of D&D and make up the bulk of combat since not every character can cast spells, but they can all use weapons. In this section, we'll take a look at how proficiency is handled when it comes to weapons, how damage is calculated, and what weapon properties do and what they mean. First, let's cover weapon proficiency. Whenever you attack an enemy in 5th edition D&D, you make what is called an attack roll, which I've already covered in the first guide of this series, and again later in the second guide. This attack roll is affected by your weapon proficiency, so let's take a look at how this plays out in BG3. Weapons in Baldur's Gate 3 are handled a bit differently than in Neverwinter Nights or Pathfinder Kingmaker, where you either had a -4 attack roll penalty, or you cannot even use a weapon when you don't have proficiency with it. In D&D 5th edition, you can use any weapon you wish on any character, but you will not gain your proficiency bonus when attacking if you aren't proficient with said weapon. You won't be penalized for using a weapon you aren't proficient in, but the likelihood of you hitting the enemy is reduced because you don't get the added benefit of proficiency. If you remember, your proficiency bonus begins at +2 and increases every 4 character levels to a maximum of +6. This means proficiency is less important at lower levels, but much more so as you progress the game and your proficiency bonus increases. In short, you want to use weapons you are proficient with whenever possible. Every character's weapon proficiency is determined by their race and class. For example, elves gain proficiency with longswords, short bows, and longbows. And wizards gain proficiency with daggers, darts, slings, quarterstaffs, and light crossbows. This means if you made an elven wizard, you would have proficiency with all 9 of those weapon types. Please note that unlike D&D 3.5 edition and Pathfinder, there are no weapon focus or weapon specialization feats, and that in 5th edition, your attack roll is modified by your proficiency bonus and ability modifier instead. This allows you to use many more weapons effectively than in either 3.5 or Pathfinder, which is important since you have less feats on average than either of these rule sets. Each weapon in D&D 5th edition falls under simple weapons or martial weapons. Simple weapons are things like clubs, quarterstaffs, short bows, and maces, while martial weapons are things like long swords, rapiers, longbows, and morning stars. Some classes have very specific weapon proficiency, like the wizard. Most classes have proficiency in simple weapons, and only a handful have proficiency in martial weapons. It's important to note that it is possible to have a general proficiency like martial, and to also have a specific weapon proficiency like longsword, which falls under martial proficiency. In this case, you don't gain any extra bonuses, you are simply considered to have proficiency in that weapon type. Unlike Pathfinder or D&D 3.5, there are not a bunch of feats that give you proficiency with weapons in 5th edition D&D. This means you'll only have proficiency with the weapons of your chosen race and class, with the one exception being if you take the Weapon Master feat, which allows you to become proficient with any 4 weapons of your choosing. Keep this in mind when creating your character, because more often than not, you'll be sticking with weapons that fall under your character creation proficiency. Every weapon in 5th edition D&D has a damage die that is rolled when you successfully make an attack roll, and this damage is then applied to the target along with your ability modifier. For example, if you attack with a great club, you will roll an 8-sided die, take that result, and add your strength ability modifier to that to get your total damage for your attack. Not every weapon uses the same die, and some are much better than others. Additionally, each weapon has a damage type, which is either bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing. This is important to note because some enemies have damage reduction against certain types of damage, and it's possible to gain damage reduction yourself, such as by taking the Heavy Armor Master feat. Pay attention while in combat and swap to a different weapon with a different damage type if yours is ineffective. Nearly every weapon has a weapon property in 5th edition D&D, and those that don't are few and far between. The following is a list of weapon properties with a brief description of what they do. This is not the full description, but rather a condensed version to give you the general idea of what these things do. Armor class, AC in D&D, is what protects you from any attack that uses an attack roll, spells included. The amount of protection you gain depends on how heavy of armor you are wearing. For example, padded armor gives you 11 AC and chainmail gives you 16, which means that enemies must reach a total of 11 or 16 on their attack rolls in order to hit you. In addition, much like 3.5 edition D&D and Pathfinder, players gain a benefit to their armor class from their dexterity when they wear lighter armor. How much benefit you gain is different from both 3.5 and Pathfinder, however, and has been simplified. When wearing light armor, you gain the full value of your dexterity modifier added to your armor class. When wearing medium armor, you gain up to +2 AC from your dexterity modifier. And when wearing heavy armor, you gain no benefit from your dexterity modifier at all. Let's do some examples. Let's say your rogue, Tolbian, has 18 dexterity, which gives him a dexterity modifier of +4. He wears studded leather armor, which has a base armor class of 12. His armor class would be 12 plus 4, giving him a total armor class of 16. If he then swaps this out for hide armor, which is medium armor, you'll have a base armor class of 12, but will only gain +2 from his dexterity modifier, giving him a total armor class of 14. This is a bad move for him, and he should look for at least half plate before using medium armor, because its base value is 15, and 15 plus 2 equals 17. Unlike weapons, proficiency in an armor type is a must-have, or you'll be facing some staunch penalties. Characters who wear armor they aren't proficient in will have disadvantage on any ability check, saving throw, or attack roll that involves strength or dexterity, and they can't cast spells. However, the upside here is that characters can cast spells while wearing armor they are proficient in, even heavy armor, with no penalty to attack rolls or arcane spell failure, which is a huge change from D&D 3.5 and Pathfinder. The only other two things to pay attention to when wearing armor is whether or not they give you disadvantage on stealth checks, and when using heavy armor, whether there is a strength requirement or not. Generally speaking, you want to use lighter armor on characters with high dexterity because lighter armors don't penalize stealth in any way, with the exception of padded armor. And you want to use heavier armor on characters with high strength because they will not incur a movement penalty, which would slow them down. Keep these things in mind and plan accordingly when making decisions about your character. Knowing these things about feats, weapons, and armor will help you tremendously when building your characters. It will allow you to focus and specialize each to do exactly what you need them to do, resulting in more success and less frustration. This was the third out of several videos on the basics of 5th edition D&D, basics that will apply to Baldur's Gate 3 and prepare you for what's to come hopefully next month. in early access anyway. If you haven't already, be sure to check out our first and second videos on the basic mechanics of D&D, as they will greatly prepare you for what's to come. The purpose of this video is to try to explain fundamental mechanics that BG3 players could benefit from knowing, helping them make better decisions about their character development. In the next video, I'll be covering classes, class features, and multiclassing, and what role they play in 5th edition, and likely Baldur's Gate 3. If you like this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button because we're going to be doing more D&D mechanics guides leading up to the launch of Early Access in August, and we're going to be doing tons more Baldur's Gate 3 builds and guide videos over the course of it as well.